People were instantly frozen into ice sculptures outdoors, gigantic hailstones fell on the streets of Japan, and a tsunami lifted waves 100 meters high, and some said this was the most realistic disaster film of the 21st century. And the story began in Antarctica, where a meteorological research team was drilling into the ice. Suddenly, the ice surface cracked around the ice shelf, and at the moment the man fell, Jack and another colleague grabbed him, while the ice drilling machine inevitably fell off the cliff. To save the precious ice core sample, Jack gathered his strength and jumped to the opposite side of the cliff. The crack grew wider, and Jack steeled himself and jumped back again while holding the ice core. Fortunately, he escaped death by a hair, and the continuously spreading fissure signaled an even greater disaster. A week later, at a conference discussing global warming, Jack, as a top climatologist, gave a speech, and through studying the ice core sample, he predicted that the Earth would re-enter an ice age under the influence of the greenhouse effect. Why would global warming lead to cooling? And simply put, the melting of polar glaciers would block the flow of the North Atlantic current toward the northern hemisphere. And if pollution continued unchecked, a major climate shift would appear 100 years later. However, the vice president thought Jack was exaggerating, and he believed taking action would cost hundreds of millions of dollars. At this moment, hailstones larger than a human head fell on the streets of Tokyo. Countless pedestrians were struck down, and rooftops were ripped away. Above New York, tens of thousands of birds began migrating south, and various animals let out strange cries. A meteorological observation center in the United Kingdom also found that 4 buoys showed abnormalities across the entire Atlantic. The professor at the center had heard Jack's speech at the Global Warming Conference and immediately called him, and after seeing the data, Jack was shocked because according to his prediction, the disaster should not occur for at least 100 years, yet it had already begun. Meanwhile, Los Angeles issued a hurricane warning, and several powerful tornadoes swept across the city with unstoppable force, leaving ruins in their path. The Hollywood sign was shredded in a second, cars fell from the sky like hailstones, and a reporter broadcasting the scene was hit by a flying billboard when he let his guard down. Even more frightening, the tornadoes slowly drew together and merged into an even larger tornado, and buildings were sliced apart wherever the storm passed. The President of the United States had no choice but to order all air traffic to stop. Jack calculated from the data that in just 6 to 8 weeks the storm would sweep across the entire northern hemisphere. Jack went to the vice president, hoping he would immediately begin evacuating people in the north. The prideful vice president ignored him, and he still believed Jack was exaggerating, and that doing so would cost tens of billions of dollars, which he thought was not worth it. Meanwhile, the drastic climate shift continued, and 3 helicopters encountered a superstorm while flying over England, and fuel froze inside the pipes, causing the engines to stop and the aircraft to crash uncontrollably. The surviving pilot tried to open the cabin door to escape, but the moment he stepped out, he was frozen solid by the minus 150-degree Fahrenheit cold. After learning the situation, the professor immediately informed Jack, and Jack unexpectedly reached an even more desperate conclusion using a supercomputer. It turned out that in addition to the superstorm in England, there was one in Canada and one in Siberia, and 8 weeks was too conservative because these 3 storms would sweep across the entire northern hemisphere within 7 days. At this moment, Jack's son Sam was in Manhattan, where lightning flashed and heavy rain poured down, and flooding submerged the train station, causing a power outage. Seeing the water slowly rise past their knees, Sam and his companions had no choice but to hide in the public library. At this moment, Laura noticed a mother and child trapped in a car who could not communicate with the police because of the language barrier, and she immediately stepped forward to help. But at this moment, a 100-meter-high wave rose on the sea like a wall of water surging toward the city. And after the mother and child were rescued, they remembered they had forgotten their passports halfway out, and Laura went back to get the bag, but the water wall was already at hand. People trapped in the library were terrified, and the citywide power outage disabled communication devices. Sam suddenly remembered that his teacher's phone was powered directly by the line and should still work, and he found a public phone and called his father. Jack warned his son that the storm would reach New York soon and that he must not go outside, or he would freeze. Jack prepared to gather his gear to find his son, but the president required him to immediately give a briefing on the disaster. Jack had no choice but to advise evacuating everyone south of a certain line on the map, and the farther south, the better, preferably to Mexico. And as for those north of the line, they had already missed the chance of rescue and would freeze if they went outside. The temperature in New York dropped sharply, the water froze into ice, and scattered people appeared walking on the surface preparing to flee south. A police officer in the library decided to lead everyone to escape the city while the snow was not too deep. Sam remembered his father's warning and tried hard to stop everyone from leaving and warned them of the consequences, but no one believed him. The police officer insisted on leading everyone away, and except for Sam, only 4 companions and a dog chose to stay. They found an old fireplace on the top floor of the library and burned books to keep warm, and the group that left the library collapsed in the snow one after another. 2 of Jack's colleagues were worried about him going to New York alone and decided to join him, and because of the heavy storm, Jack's car broke down near Philadelphia, forcing them to walk the remaining 150 kilometers to New York. When they crossed a snow-covered shopping mall, the sled was too heavy and a pane of glass cracked, and the sled with all 3 people slid downward, and Jack pulled out his ice axe and stopped the fall just in time. But the glass under them was also slowly cracking under the weight, and to avoid all 3 falling, a teammate hanging below cut the rope, sacrificing himself to give the other 2 a chance. Elsewhere, Sam's bravery quickly drew him and Laura closer, and after they had just shared a sweet moment, Laura came down with a high fever the next day and fell unconscious. It turned out her calf had been cut while rescuing another child, and the wound became infected, causing sepsis, and without a large dose of antibiotics, she could fall into shock. Sam remembered that outside the library there was a massive ship brought in by the tsunami that must have medicine, so he broke apart a chair and strapped the planks to his feet for warmth, and then he and 2 companions went into the ship to find medicine, not knowing an even greater danger was drawing near. A pack of wolves that had escaped from the zoo also entered the ship in search of food, and the 3 found the medicine they needed in the infirmary. But when leaving, they discovered the cafeteria and wanted to bring back some food. At this moment, the wolves followed the sound and found them, and one wolf bit a companion's leg, and the 3 managed to shut the door as more and more wolves entered the cafeteria. But Sam noticed there was no wind outside, which was an extremely dangerous sign indicating the storm center had reached New York and they were in the eye, and if they did not leave quickly, they would freeze solid. So Sam used his intelligence and courage to successfully distract the wolves, and they put their injured companion on a small boat and pulled him toward the library. At this moment, the temperature in Manhattan was dropping 10 degrees per second and buildings were rapidly freezing from top to bottom. Jack also keenly noticed the national flag had stopped flapping, and father and son both began a race for survival. Jack found an opening and lifted the cover and threw his teammate in the gear inside first. Sam also reached the library entrance, but the destination was the room with the burning fireplace, and the door was frozen shut as the extreme cold rushed in, and they could only keep the fire blazing, hoping not to freeze. After some time, the eye of the storm passed, and Jack was still 40 kilometers from Manhattan. He and his teammate took their gear and continued onward, passing frozen bodies everywhere and not knowing whether his son had survived. The next day, Jack awoke in his tent and found the sun appearing in the sky, and the storm over North America was slowly disappearing, and not far away was snow-buried Manhattan with only the library's roof remaining. Jack jumped into the library and searched for a long time before finally seeing a yellow light through a crack in a door, and when he opened it, he found several people asleep on chairs, including his son Sam. Jack used shortwave radio to send a message to the American embassy saying there were survivors in New York and that they had finally made it through this disaster. The vice president immediately sent several helicopters to rescue them and search for other survivors. At the end of the story, Jack and the others were successfully taken away. More survivors appeared on rooftop tops waiting for rescue, and after a brief period of self-cleansing, the Earth revealed an unprecedentedly clear sky.